for the reading of the gospel if you are able.
A reading from the Gospel according to St. Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Some of the Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife with but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her. So in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman who also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those that belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die any more, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now he is the God, not of the dead, but of the living. For to him all of them are alive. Here ends the gospel.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, it's nice to turn around and see a few more people here. It's either that or I sit at the piano thinking that you're glaring at the back of my head. Good morning.
Good morning.
Interesting lessons at this late period in the season after Pentecost today. These are more generally lessons we might think more about around the season of Easter. And yet we cannot forget from Sunday to Sunday that this season of Easter lives with us throughout the year. Every single time we gather for worship, we are celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. In every celebration of the sacrament of Holy Baptism and in every celebration of the sacrament of Holy Communion, we are living as the resurrected children of God in this world, because our death has already been accomplished in our baptism. So you and I have something to have great joy about every single day of our lives. But somehow other things seem to kind of squeeze that out. Most recently I can think about Gabriel Burt's serious car accident this past week. He's been in intensive care since that accident. His family is very concerned. He's had numerous surgeries. He has a brain bleed after the accident. And of course, there are a myriad of legal concerns around Gabriel's circumstances. Spent a lot of time on the phone, and Melody did with Sharon too this week, and there were lots of tears shed. And that's rightfully so. But in the midst of that attack on the joy of the resurrection in our everyday living, we have to remember the one to whom we belong, the one to whom Gabriel was committed when he was adopted. We need to remember that for Gabriel and know that he's in God's care, as well as the very good care of the hospital where he's in intensive care. In our lives, every single day, things get pretty tough. We tend to be people of privilege in this world. In the nation in which we live, we have a lot of stuff. Even those of us whose economy is not great have more stuff than many other places in the world have. I hardly know of a person who doesn't have a cell phone. No? Yes, Holly and Della too, because I have to call Della with the prayer requests. Maybe our church will be so flush one day we'll be able to provide cell phones to the prayer team so we can message back and forth all the time. Because sometimes it's awkward if I get a prayer request at 10 o'clock at night. I just know Della's raring right then to get it. But we do that because we do those prayers because we have great joy in the presence of Christ and in the provision of God for our lives in this world. We're coming up to that national holiday when we celebrate gluttony. Oh, come on, face it. You're going to eat too much on Thanksgiving, right? You're probably going to have a nap, since all of that stuff in the turkey makes you sleepy.
Gotta watch football.
And the table of your home, just as the table of this church parish hall, will be set with an abundance of food that for some people in this world is beyond their belief. And yet we still struggle from day to day with knowing joy in the presence of God through Jesus Christ. It could be because we're in pain that we struggle with that. You hear the list every week from the altar of people who suffer with regular pain. Sometimes it's almost debilitating. Melody and I both had a horrific day this week with the pain in our knees and hips and feet. We never did figure out what it was caused by, but both of us were really in rough shape at the same time. I'm sure David has days like that, and Julie has days like that, and Mary has days like that, and Maria has days like that, and Nancy has days like that, and Tricia, if she doesn't fall off her bike, she usually doesn't have days like that, but once in a while, she decides to have a day like that. And I can go through the whole list of people in the congregation, and we can talk about how that pushes us away from our joy in knowing the loving gift of the resurrection through Jesus Christ. Sometimes we struggle with our economies in our homes. We are overburdened by the things we have quite often. It can be from a house payment to a car payment to a vacation payment to all of those things are there and part of the expectation of life in abundance. I think more that we set for ourselves than God sets for us. Because abundance really has to do with the abundance of God's love and grace in our lives every day. Would I like my knees to hurt a lot less? Absolutely. Nancy, would you like your battle with this disease taken care of and gone? Absolutely. Same thing is true for Felicia. If that could happen, that would be the most joyous thing in life, in all of our lives. But that tends not to happen for us very often. We often have to live with our discomfort and our pain, and once in a while we have wonderful miracles of healing and reduction in that pain. And we thank God for those, but sometimes in the midst of pain, what happens to us, folks, when we have a lot of pain? We get grumpy. Yeah, I don't know which dwarf Grumpy was, but I am it on days when my knees are really bad. But I shouldn't be, because I have the joy of Christ in my life. We think Paul went with some kind of a burden through almost his entire ministry. Some scholars believe that perhaps it was caused by mosquitoes in Tarsus, where Paul was raised. That maybe he battled malaria in his life off and on during his entire life. Others think that it may have been the revelation of Christ on the road to Damascus, which caused him to have limited vision for the rest of his life. Remember, he was blinded for 3 days. And maybe regaining his sight wasn't regaining the fullness of his sight, but enough sight to function. We really don't know for sure, but we know that Paul talks about the burden of his health in his life and ministry on behalf of the gospel, and yet it does not keep him from being who he needs to be. It does not prevent him from answering the call of God on his life to proclaim the good news about Jesus Christ for all people, Jews and non-Jews alike. We don't have to look very much farther than the 6 o'clock news in the evening, or the 10 o'clock news, or the 9 o'clock news if you watch one of those channels that has it starting at 9 and it runs for an hour. We don't have to go any further than that to realize the grave tragedy that is all around us, and sometimes includes us in one way or another. We were driving home on golf links on Friday afternoon after I picked the boys up at school downtown, and between Swan and Craycroft, there was a big Ford Expedition with a nice-sized new sedan jammed up to the rear axle underneath the back of it. Now, nobody planned to start their day that way, but it was the way that day had happened. And our question for us is, when we're in those circumstances, where do we find ourselves spiritually? Are we sure that God has been with us, even in the accident, if it's our fault, or if it's not our fault in the accident, that we're really taken care of? We have many, many blessings in our lives that help take care of some of those things, but the greatest blessing is the presence of God in Jesus Christ and the everyday presence of God's Spirit, helping us in this journey to find joy constantly. The most helpful thing, and of course, our readings today are about death. They're about hope in the face of death. I have to tell you, I'm still only 17, folks. There, I'm 17. The rest of me is ancient, but there I'm 17. I feel very blessed by that my boys would tell me I have an old person personality, and in fact, I'm called ancient by my children sometimes. Because they don't have friends whose parents are generally my age. their friends have 30-year-old parents. Holy cow, that was 39 years ago. Man, that was forever ago. But I've lived in this life with thanksgiving to God for all of the blessings that have been given to me. And there have been some tough times and some difficult times, and yet I know God has never left me, has never deserted me in any of it. And I am most thankful to God for that. And I hope that is a place where we can find ourselves every single day. Because we are being taken care of, even in the face of death. You hear me play piano every Sunday. But for my parents' funerals, I sat and played hymns for 45 minutes before the services for each of my parents. Because that's my journey. The prayers of the hymnody, the spirituality of the hymnody, that is where I find my great joy in my relationship with Christ. And Debbie will come in and have to check on me. Because sometimes I get really quiet. And I don't play, and I think she's afraid I've gone away. But I've just been overwhelmed by some piece of music and the words of that piece of music, and have to take a few minutes to pull myself back together. Because that's what hymns mean to me. They are the words of the heart and spirituality of generations of people who knew and know joy in Christ. In the face of what we all know is coming someday. And the promise that we're going to be just fine. No matter how tough it gets here. At the end of all things, our end, or maybe the end of all things, God's promise will be fulfilled for us. And we're going to be okay. That's that wonderful gift of faith we have from God. And the outpouring of God's grace for our lives through Jesus Christ. No matter what comes, we're going to be fine. So we can indeed live with joy. And being reminded of that in this season after Pentecost. I like to call this whole time after Pentecost the season of Pentecost. Because it's really about living into the presence of Christ's Spirit in our lives every single day through the ministry of Christ. Through his reaching out to people and bringing the truth of the gospel and the healing of God and the power of God's grace into the lives of every person he met. What an incredible gift for you and me. We're going into that season of gifts now, except it's the season of support your local economy gifts. But this is really, truly the season of the greatest gift of all. The bounty of our land that we live in, our nation that we live in, and the gift of celebrating once again the birth of Christ. All within 4 weeks of each other. And then that's got to last us until we get to Easter. And we get that all reset again in our lives on Easter Sunday, as we've kind of plowed downward through Lent. Remembering that I bear responsibility and you all bear responsibility for the necessity of the sacrifice of God's only Son. And in the midst of that, God has chosen not to punish, but he has chosen to lift up and heal. And that is amazing and a thing of great joy. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.